Welcome to the Big Kid Dialog System tutorial. I'm going to show you exactly how to make the system that you're seeing on screen right now. So I'll be taking you from zero to a fully featured text box where you can have branching dialogue, character portraits, a lot of expressive different features, text effects like having colored words or shaking letters, anything like that, and doing it all in a way where it should be super incredibly easy to use in your own game. And I'll teach you everything you need to know to be able to add more stuff to it. There are a couple things that I want to note before we start on this. First, this is, I would say, pretty advanced tutorial. There's a lot of work that goes into making something like this, and there's probably a lot of places to make some little mistakes. So if you're a beginner, something I would definitely recommend you do first is watching my menu system text box video. And honestly, to anyone watching this, I would recommend you probably watch that one first. It helps lay down a couple fundamental principles, and it's just a lot friendlier. So I'll have that link below. But anyways, yeah, there's a bit to this tutorial series. It's 5 parts, each covering a pretty specific thing. So really all that's just to say, make sure you're really paying attention and you're really cross-referencing your code with what you're seeing on the video. A couple parts in the video are edited kind of quickly just so I wouldn't have these crazy long videos. But obviously I still walk you through everything, which is why the videos are a little bit longer. So yeah, this first video is just about setting up a text box that has a typewriter effect and has multiple pages that you can flip through. It also is a lot of the groundwork, so I would suggest not skipping this one if you want to get straight to the branching dialogue. But yeah, that's about what you need to know heading into the video. And before we get started, I'll just say that the purposes of these videos are obviously educational. I want to see more people make more games, and to that effect, these are obviously free. So if this video ends up helping you out, you can support me by following me on Twitter, subscribing here, and by around October 2021, I'll be putting out a little action game. So feel free to pick up a copy of that when or if it's already out. And I'm always working on a long-term project called Rosa Starcross. And if you follow me on Twitter and subscribe here, you'll more or less be able to keep up with that. Anyways, let's get started and good luck. Okay, so starting off here, I just have my project open, and just like with the menu system video, I'll be putting everything in a nice brightly colored folder for this video, so that way we can keep everything all nice and organized. In this folder, I have 4 things already. One is a room for testing, I'll show you that in a second, and the other 3 involve setting up our font and our text box background. These 3 things are actually directly from the menu system video, and they're very, very important to our dialogue system. So if you haven't done the menu system video, or you just need a refresher, I'm actually just going to put that little section from this video right here. There's a time code on the bottom here, so if you've already done this for the other video and you're well acquainted with it, then you can just skip this part. But if you're not sure, it is very important. So in Sprite main font, I have this, which is most of a font, just a very, very simple pixel art font. Feel free to pause this as I scroll through, and if you want to copy it, whatever. You don't have to make your own font, but it's just a lot more smooth and handy to have whenever you're using your, everything is totally your own assets. And you're going to make sure while you're making your own or copying this or whatever, that all of the characters are in the same position like this. And you're going to want to make your font in this exact order. This order is very important for GameMaker to know whenever we actually set up this font, what to type. Then once everything's in the same place, you can go to Image, and then auto trim, and it'll make your sprite as small as possible without cutting anything off of any of the letters. And here in your workspace, just make sure that your origin of your sprite is in the top left. Now we have the menu background we're going to use, and GameMaker 2.3 has 9 slicing, which is a great feature that is super, super useful for menus and text boxes, all that kind of stuff. It basically means that you can make a sprite background and resize it however you want, and it won't stretch and strain itself in weird ways. It also means it's very, very easy to do cool little animated backgrounds like this. So I'll show you really quick how to set these up. So in my image editor, I'm going to go ahead and resize these frames to 48 pixels by 48. And now you can see how it's divided up. There's a centerpiece, there's a top, left, bottom, and right. I have it animated so that it'll loop as it goes diagonally down, but you can just have this be a solid color, whatever. Then I did the same thing I did with the font, and I auto-trimmed it to get rid of all the excess stuff. Out here, we can go to the 9-slice panel, activate 9-slice, make sure that it is checked on, and then you can drag these borders to tell GameMaker where you want it to actually separate it out. If you're just using a solid color, it doesn't really matter, but if you do have like an animation or you're doing something like this, you can select the left, bottom, top, and right, and the center all separately, and switch them down here in tile mode to repeat. I think by default they'll always be on stretch, which can make an animation or something look a little goofy. Okay, and the last thing is just make sure that with this sprite, our origin is also on the top left. Once you have those sprites ready, you want to create an object called object settings like this. I would use this to store information, obviously regarding the settings for the whole game, so I've done it where I've set it to be persistent, so once it's been created, it stays in the game, and it doesn't go away once you leave the room that you created it in, so make sure that's checked. Then in a create event, I've created a global variable called global.font_main, and I use this function here called font_add_sprite, which lets you create a font from a sprite asset that you have. I've used my sprite main font. We've started the first character at 32. We've set proportional to be true, which means that letters will be spaced based on how wide they are. So for example, an I won't take as much room as an O will. And then we put separation as 1, and this is just the space between every letter that we type. So just 1 pixel. And since we're working with a low resolution font, 1 pixel is a very appropriate space. Then you want to add an event, and you want to add a cleanup event, which runs whenever this object is destroyed or whenever the game ends. And we just want to delete our global.fontMain, because if we don't, it'll take up some memory that will never be freed, and it can eventually slow down our computer and crash the game. So then what we want to do is we just want to drop it in our testing room. So I put it here on the instances layer, just in the top left. This room is the exact size of my camera, which helps with figuring out the visuals of your text boxes, as you'll see in a bit. And then the only thing in here is the object settings. And one last thing, since your object settings is persistent, that means anytime you leave and then come back into this room, another version of it will create. So you want to put this in like an initialization room, or like a splash screen or a title screen, because you don't need more than one of these running around. Alright, so that's it for that setup. Okay, so if we're all squared away with that, then let's actually get started on our text box. So let's go ahead and create a new object, and let's call it obj_textbox. Very nice. Now in our create event, let's go ahead and set up a couple variables that we're going to need. For this text box, by the end of it, we're going to have a lot of stuff kind of in here, such as the nature of more expressive stuff like this text box, but we're going to start pretty simple. So we can start a little section here, and we can call them text box parameters. So starting with the dimensions of our text box, we can have text box width, and I have picked 200 for this, and text box height, and I have picked, I believe, 64 for this, not 63. A good way to find the dimensions of what you want your text box to be is to go into a room like this where it's just the size of whatever your camera is actually going to be. Create an asset layer up here, and then you can start placing your text box sprite wherever you want to and dragging it around. And that way you can just upfront visualize exactly what you need it to be, and you don't have to test with a bunch of random numbers over here. So for this text box system, I'm setting it up kind of like how I do it in Rosa Starcross, which is a separate square for a character portrait and then another square for dialogue. So the main one we're looking for the dimensions right now is going to be this larger one for the actual dialogue, but you can place both of these here to sort of visualize it and make sure you know exactly how big you want it to be. So I would probably scoot this in here to make this nice, and then do the same over here. And this way it would end up being something similar to this. Then you can just kind of drag your thing up to the top left here, and then check what this coordinate is here, and at the bottom left, you can actually see the width is 144 and the height is 64. So obviously I spent like a little bit more time kind of tweaking it to how I wanted on the other one. But just know this is a good way to find those values without having to do a bunch of running the game and testing it. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these, and we're going to hop back over to our create event. The next thing I want to add is my border, and the border is going to be the distance from the sides of the text box that the text will be. So that way it's not all pressed up against the edges. Now we want to make a variable called line sep. This will be the separation vertically between the lines on each page. And we can go ahead and get our line width, which will very simply just be our text box width minus our border times 2. So this is just the maximum width in pixels how long a line can be before we need to actually break it and create a new line down the page. Obviously just getting it by taking whatever the width that we've set and getting rid of the left and right border of the box, and that'll just give us the exact value that we want. Make sure you have this exactly like this. It needs to be under border and it needs to be under width. because these variables need to be set before this one does, obviously, so it knows how to read this stuff. Now we can start setting up another section that I'm just going to call the text. So first, let's set a variable called page, and this will just let us know what actual page of dialog that we're on. Simple enough. Then we can create an array variable called text. And this is going to be a string because this is going to be the actual text that shows up on the page. And obviously we make this an array so that we can have multiple pages of text. Then we just need a couple more things to cover the actual typing effect. First thing is we're going to need to know how long each of these strings are in this text variable. So let's set another array variable called text length. And we'll set it up like this, where we say text length 0 equals string length of our text 0. This will return how many characters are in this string here, which will be important to know because we don't want GameMaker to try and type a character that doesn't exist. And one of the ways it would do that is by trying to type too many characters. So now we have a variable that I call draw char for draw character. We'll set that to 0. This will dictate how many of the characters are being drawn currently of our text string. So in the beginning, we want it to draw nothing, and then this number to slowly count up, which will create that sort of typewriter effect. And then we can just use a variable to actually add to that draw char variable. And I'm just going to call that text speed. And we'll set that to 1. 1 is a pretty good number to pick right now, so don't change this, at least yet. And for now, I'm just going to do one more variable, and I'm just going to call this setup and set it equal to false. We'll use this variable to check if a setup has been done, and if it hasn't, then we're going to run certain code in our draw event before we actually try and get anything on screen. This will be good to get our text length for all of the pages right in the beginning, but as we go on with the video, it's going to be important for a lot of different stuff. So for now, we're ready to get into our draw event. So let's add that. So we're actually going to be setting up a couple more variables first, just stuff that doesn't really need to be in the create event. So something we want to get is kind of the position of our camera and the general position of our text box, since we're in the draw event here. So we can say text box x equals camera get view x, and then of our view camera 0. This way we're just keeping track of where our camera is, so that way our text box won't draw to some specific X position in the room and it won't follow our camera. And we kind of need to do the same thing with the Y, but this X value is going to be altered a little bit as we go on, which is why we're just setting it to the regular X value of the camera. But for this system, our Y value isn't going to change. So we can say text box Y equals camera get view Y, and we can go ahead and set an offset here. I picked 144 for mine, and you can figure this out the same way I showed you with the other one. Just grab this here and figure out where you want your text box to be this way from the top, and I would probably put it around there maybe. That's about 128 on the bottom left there, but I have it set to down here. Yeah, so I have it set to where this will be the Y offset. So right now, what we're getting is this position here, based on the camera. The camera's X, and then the camera's Y plus 144. Like I said, you can find your own values for this, just whatever you think looks the nicest. So let's get rid of that, and get back over here. So we're getting these every frame, which is pretty important. And the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and use that setup variable. So we can just say, this is our setup, and we'll say if setup is equal to false, then we can run some code and get a bunch of information we need before we start trying to draw the text and go through the different pages. We can go ahead and say setup equals true because we only want to run all this code for one frame. So it'll run all this once, setup will be set to true after that, and then on the next loop it won't run through any of this. So first thing we want to do is let's go ahead and set our font. So we can do draw set font, and I'm going to use my global.font main. We also want to set our vertical and horizontal alignments for the text. So whenever we pick a point to start drawing text, we want that text top left to line up with that point. So we can say draw set v align, set that to fa underscore top. Then we can draw set h align, and we'll set that to the left. Okay, so now very, very basic stuff is set up just to make sure everything's going to look right once we start actually drawing things. So now we want to get stuff like our text length for each of the individual pages. So we're going to need to loop through all of them. So we can say loop through the pages. And whenever we loop through something, we need to know how many times we want to loop. And so let's create a variable called page number, which shows us the number of pages that we have in our text box. And we can get this by saying array length of text. Because whenever we're creating this text box, obviously the information that we are going to be feeding into it is going to be through this text array. And we want this to work out to where we can put any number of pages as we want. And so I could say text 0 is this, text 1 is this, whatever, and then just keep on going. And we want our box to be able to loop through all of those pages on its own. So for right now, this is how we're going to get this page number variable. And you know what? Let's go ahead and actually initialize it here. That would be a much better idea for now. So page number equals 0. The reason we're going to go ahead and initialize this here is because we're going to be getting this variable a little bit differently later on in the video, but for now, this is the most efficient way to get it. Hopefully that doesn't sound too confusing. If it is, don't worry, you'll completely understand whenever we get to that point. So just know for now, we're totally golden. So let's actually do our for loop now. So we're going to say for var p equals 0. We're going to do p for page. So as long as p is less than our page number, we will add to p so we can loop through some stuff. I explained exactly how for loops work in the menu system video, so if you don't know how they work, this would definitely be the point to go back and just watch that video first, if you haven't already. So what are we looking for right now? We're definitely looking for the length in text of each page. So we could say text length of p equals string length of text p. Oopsie daisy. There we go. This is exactly how we're setting it up here. We're just making sure that we are returning the correct values based on which page we're on. And we're doing that for each page now. We can go ahead and comment that out too. Might as well do a lot of commenting so you can keep track of this later, if you need to go back or go back through the video or whatever. Okay, and it's pretty good to make detailed comments like this. For right now, the only other thing we need to find is a variable that I'm going to call textx offset. And we're going to make this an array. And this is going to be the distance from the left side of our screen that our text box actually is. We're finding this dynamically because we're setting this text box up in a way where if there is not a character speaking, the text box will kind of center itself like this. And if there is a character speaking, it'll scoot over so there will be room for a little character box. And it can also scoot to the left if we want a character box to the right side of it. And since we're not worrying about those quite yet, we are just going to find right now the value that we want it to be from when there is no character. So just find whatever value you want. Remember, every time you check these, you want to make sure that you're resetting your text box to kind of the size that you're going to have it. So I'm not doing a very good job of keeping that consistent, but if we were to say that this is the size of it, this is about 48 pixels away, so that would be a good number to put it at. So I'm going to get rid of this. In my notes, I've set it to 44, and we can comment this out a couple times. Say first, say get the X position for the text box. And then I'm going to tab this in so I can comment on it a second time and leave room for calculating some other stuff in the minute. And we'll say this is for having no character, and say this will be centering the text box in the screen. Okay, so for now, that's all the setup that we're going to be doing. I'm going to go ahead and close that, and we're going to move on to typing the text. This part's going to be pretty easy. So let's say if our draw char is less than our text length of the current page that we're on, because if you remember, our draw char is holding the number of characters that we should be drawing. We just want to add to it. So draw char plus equals our text speed variable. So our draw char is going to start at 0. Then we're going to keep adding this text speed until we get to the full length of the text. And we're going to be drawing our text based on this variable here. And that'll make a typing effect. And one thing we should do is right under this, we can clamp this So no matter what our speed ends up being, we're not going to get any errors. So we can say drawChar equals clamp. We're going to input its own value, and we're going to clamp this number between 0 and our text length of the page we're on. And clamping just means that we take whatever this first value is here, and then we give it a minimum and maximum value, and it just can't go beyond those two extremes. So if our drawChar happened to be negative 100, it would just return 0 at this line, and if it happened to be a billion, then it would just return whatever the maximum number of characters we have on our pages. This way we avoid any kind of messy errors of GameMaker trying to draw letters that aren't there or something like that. Now the next thing we want to do is give the player the ability to proceed through the pages of text. So this next section we'll call flip through pages, and we want to do this based on some type of button press. So up on top we can actually create a new variable to store a button press, and we can just call this accept key, and I'm going to store this as keyboard check pressed, and we're just going to use the space bar for this. You can set it to whatever you want to. If you want to set it to a letter, the way you would do that is letters don't have these VK constants. You would use this little thing here called ORD, and what you would pass through this is a string of whatever button. So if you wanted it to be E, then you would put a capital E in here, so this would be checking for the E key being pressed. I'm just going to keep it as space. So now we have a variable that is returning whether or not that the space button was like just pressed on this frame. So that's whenever we want to run this code to flip through pages and skip dialogue and stuff. So we'll say if accept key, then we can run this code. And I'm going to be doing this kind of a simple way, where if the text is not done typing, if you press the space bar, it will fill out the whole page. And if the page is done typing, then it will go to the next page. You can use as many different buttons as you want for this kind of thing. It doesn't really matter. You should be able to apply it to this pretty easily. So first let's say if the typing is done, then we can go to the next page. And so that's if our draw character is equal to our text length, then that means that the page has fully played out and been fully typed. Open these brackets here. Then now we're going to go to the next page, or if we're out of pages, we want to get rid of our text box. So we'll do that check real quick, and we'll start with what our next page case is going to be. So we'll say if our page is less than our page number minus 1, then we can just add the page that we're on, and we want to set our draw character back to 0. So that way it restarts with the next page having nothing and then it typing all the way up to the end. The reason we do page number minus 1 is because page number is returning the full size of our text array, which arrays start with the 0 value and then go all the way up. So if there were 4 text pages, then that would be text 0, text 1, text 2, and text 3. So the maximum one of those that we want to be able to actually read will be text 3, because we're going to start at page 0, and then we're going to go up to page 1, then to page 2, and then to page 3, and that is our final page. So that's where we don't want to be adding this variable anymore. Hopefully that makes sense. So now that we are adding a page, if we're not on the last page, then we can add a little else here. And we'll go ahead and label that as destroy the text box. All we really want to do is just destroy itself. So instance destroy. So now if we press the accept key, if the text box has already been fully typed out and it's done, then we will cycle through the pages until we get to the last page, and then it will just get rid of itself. Now the only thing left to do is we know what we want to do whenever the page is already filled out, but if it's not, we just want to fill out the page. So that's pretty easy to do. We're going to add another else down here let me separate it out like this a little bit so you can see a little bit better. So this is all here, and we're going to say if this isn't true, which would mean that we're not done typing, if not done typing, we'll add a little else here, another brackets. So this is the else to this condition up here. We will just say draw character, drawChar equals text length of our page. So now if it's not done typing, it will just immediately fill out the page, and then the next time we are to hit the accept key, we can actually move on. Okay, feel free to clean this up however you want to. I like to keep things pretty compact, but it might be easier for some people to sort of give everything a lot of space so you can really see what's going on. Okay, we've almost got something ready to go. Now we just need to actually draw the text box. And before we do this, let's actually just set up a couple more things in the create event here that I kind of forgot about. So we want to add a few variables that help us properly draw and animate our actual text box background. So let's set a variable called textbSpr for text box sprite, and I'm going to set that to my sprite text box that I have over there. Then we need to set our textbImage. We'll set that to 0. And we need to set a speed for that as well. So textbImage speed. The reason we're going to be doing this with our own variables is because we are not setting our sprite index of our text box to this sprite. And the reason being is that we're actually going to be animating a couple different things once we're done with this, including like a character speaking with a dialog box. So it's kind of just best to give everything its own variables that we can control instead of just using the built-in stuff in GameMaker. It'll look totally identical to how it looks whenever it's built in, it just takes us a couple different steps. So we want to get our text box image speed. We can open up our text box, and if you have an animated one like I do, just set it up here to whatever you want it to be. I think 6 frames per second looks pretty good. And all that is for each frame, this is 6 divided by 60, because it will be 6 frames lapsing over the course of 60 frames in the game. So whatever this number is, so say you set it to, say you like this, 11, you would just set this to 11 divided by 60. So this speed is just whatever this number is divided by 60, or whatever your game speed is. I assume most of you probably have your game speed set at 60 frames a second. If your game is set at 30 frames a second or something like that, then it would just be divided by 30. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Then we can come back over to our draw event. And before we start drawing our text box, we can do some stuff with those variables. So we can actually go ahead and get what frame we want it to show. Basically means that we're going to be manually animating it. And we can just say textbImage plus equals our textbImage speed. So whenever we start drawing that sprite, we'll just be using this value as the sub image. Then we need to set some new variables because we need to grab and store the width and the height of our sprite. So we can say textbSprite W for width, and that just equals sprite get width of our textbSprite. And we want to do the same thing with the height. So textbSprite underscore H. Make sure you change this to height. We're going to need these values to make sure that we are drawing our box up here with the correct width and height in pixels. If you watched the menu box video, you'll know what I'm talking about. If not, you'll see in a second. So let's go ahead and draw the back of the text box. And here's how we're going to do that. We're going to use the function draw sprite ext extended. So the sprite we're going to draw is going to be our text box sprite. Our sub image is going to be that text box image. Our x is going to be this value we got up here plus this offset value that we set here. So it's going to be text box x plus text x offset of whatever page we're on. So let's put that down here. So text box x plus text x offset of our current page. Our y is just going to be our text box y. And then here, for our x and y scale is where these are going to come in handy. So we want to take the width that we manually set, so text box width, and divide that by our textb underscore spr underscore w. So we are taking this number that we set in pixels. So for me, that's 200. And we are dividing it by whatever the width of our text box sprite is. So in this case, it would be 20, but this could be any number. The good thing about doing it this way means that you could make any type of text box sprite. As long as you chop it up and set the 9 slice properly, this will always give you the correct scale to match 200 pixels. So we can do the exact same thing for the height. So text box height divided by our textb sprite h. Perfect. And for the final values, I'm not going to rotate this at all. I'm going to set the color to see white, which means it will just show up as this exact text box, and then I'm just going to set the alpha to 1. You could change these however you want. Once we get farther into the video, whenever we start doing the more dynamic stuff, you'll find that you could add different variables for this kind of stuff, but I'm just going to keep these simple. So now the actual back of the text box is being drawn, and the only thing left to draw is the actual text itself. So down here, I'm going to say draw the text. And actually something I'm going to do, I'm going to comment out these to make them a little bit more obvious that they're sort of the big sections here. So before we draw the text, it's probably a good idea to have some text to draw. So in the create event here, I've changed what my text 0 is, and then I've added 3 more. And it's just some garbage of varying lengths, so we can check and make sure everything wraps around and that the page flipping works. So go ahead and add a couple of these, something like this, just whatever. So now back into the draw, starting with the draw text. First thing we want to get is, what is it that we actually want to draw in this moment? It is our text array, but only up to our draw char. So that way it types because the draw char is adding constantly. So let's set a local variable by doing var, and I'm going to call this underscore draw text. And we are going to set that equal to string copy. What this function lets us do is pass a string through it, select which character we want to start on, and then how many characters we want to copy from that point on. So we're going to use the text of the current page we're on, so text page. We're going to start at the first character, which for strings actually starts at the number 1, not 0 like a lot of things in programming. Just kind of get used to this, and I'll explain it every time it kind of comes up. There's a couple places later on in this where it can kind of be hard to remember, so just stick with the video pretty close. But anyway, so we're starting with character 1, and then our count is going to be our draw char. Now this string is returning exactly what we want to type, and we just need to now draw the text. So we can do draw text extended, and this will have it automatically break lines and stuff for us, which is pretty nifty. So we need our x and y coordinates. Our x and y coordinates are going to be the same x and y coordinates as the actual text box itself, but we're going to be adding in that border variable. So for our x, I can just take this little bit here. I'm going to copy the x position here, paste it, and then I'm also going to add my border. I can do the same over here. So we're going to take the same y variable, put this here, add our border. Oh my god. Then we're going to draw a string, which we already got up there, so that's draw text. Just plug that in. And our separation and width we set in the create event already, and that will be line sep and line width. So line sep line width. So to test it, obviously we need to go into our room, and we can go ahead and grab an instance of our text box and drop it on an instance layer in a room anywhere. It doesn't really matter, since we're specifying where everything needs to draw through code. Now, one thing is, this room is totally empty for me. There's nothing in here, so this will show up since it's on the layer above the background. But if you're already testing this in your game with kind of stuff going on, something that you should probably go ahead and do is in your object text box, in the create event, you probably just want to go ahead and set the depth to like a really low number, because you pretty much always want your text boxes to show up on top of everything else. So we can just say depth equals -9999, something like that. So now that it's in the room, we can run it and test it. Okay, that's typing all right. The page flipping works. It's a short piece of text, and there's a long piece of text. Nice. You can see here I've given myself enough room in my text box to have 4 lines of dialogue. So that's pretty good for me. I'm going to go ahead and rerun this one more time so I can test the text skipping. And it looks like that works fine too. And it gets rid of itself. Now we did a lot of stuff before we did any tests, which is just kind of the nature of the beast when it comes to stuff like text boxes that kind of require a few different moving parts to go together. If something looks weird, or if something is giving you an actual error and your game isn't running or it's crashing at some point, now's the time to go back through the video and make sure you kind of copied everything the right way, kind of listen to maybe how I explain things again. And if it just looks a little bit weird, it might be that you maybe picked some weird numbers in the beginning part where we were figuring out how large it needs to be. All these kind of width variables, border variables, all that kind of stuff can kind of drastically change the way your text box looks. But hopefully everything is fine for you now. This is kind of the first big step, is actually getting the text box up there where it types. The main thing you probably notice here is whenever the text gets to the edge, it keeps typing until it's too long and then it wraps around. You probably see it here. Yeah, you see it starts typing and then it pops back over whenever it realizes it's too long. Yep, look at that. Okay, not a problem. We're going to manage this later because we're going to go about the way we type the text in a completely different way towards the end, where we get into the more expressive stuff and interesting things. But we're going to keep it like this for a minute just so we don't have a bunch of stuff getting in the way of what I think is probably the more important thing, which is the actual dialogue choices and linking text boxes together. So this is sort of the end of the first section. Like I said, if you're having any issues, if something looks a little bit weird, now would be the time to go ahead and take a break. Maybe come back, skim through the first part of the video again, maybe even watch it again. And then we're going to move on to the next part. Okay, congratulations on getting through part 1, and thank you for watching. Like I said in the beginning, obviously it helped me out a lot if you followed me on Twitter and subscribed here. The game you're seeing right now is an action game that I'm going to try and put out in October of 2021. And if you're watching this video pretty soon after it goes up, then pretty soon from this point, I'll be posting an actual trailer for it. Then of course there's Rose of Starcross. Big, long-term, super high passion project of mine. It's had a lot of work put into it. That's how I figured out how to do a lot of this stuff that I'm doing tutorials on. So you can actually play a demo of that right now if you want to. There will be a link in that in the description. That's free. And yeah, all 5 parts of this video will be available within the first 5 days of this first video being posted. So chances are all 5 videos are probably out, so you can start on part 2 right now if you want to. Might be a good idea to take a break, like I said, but that's really up to you. See you later.